Hey everyone, it's Jeannie Walters, and it's another Friday, which means it's an Experience Investigators Ask Me Anything webinar. Today, we will be talking about how to create proactive customer experiences and avoid reactive customer experiences. So, as always, we love to hear where you're joining us from. So, as you settle in, we'd love to hear where you're joining us from. And also in these days of a lot of us still staying at home and not having a lot of mobility, I'm wondering, how are you getting away? And what does that mean? It could mean that you're taking a drive. It could mean that you're going to the park. It could mean that you're squeezing in a vacation. But I'm curious, how are you getting away from kind of the everyday in today's world? So today, as I mentioned, we'll be covering the ways to create a proactive customer experience, because a lot of what we do can kind of slide into that reactive place if we're not careful. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Jeannie Walters. I've been doing this work for about 20 years now. I've been focused on customer experience and the mission of my organization, which is to create fewer ruined days for customers, because I believe that makes a better world for all of us. And in today's environment, I'm doing that through a lot of content, a lot of video presentations like this, as well as working with teams all over the world who are focused on how do they plan for the future of customer experience? How do they engage with their employees? So I'm doing a lot of coaching and workshops with customer experience leaders and teams of all sorts of organizations all over the world, which is really rewarding and I love it. So as always, today we have our Director of Marketing, David, with us.
Hello, everybody.
Hey, David. And you just got away. So I want to hear from you. How did you get away in today's world?
I did. My wife and I celebrated our 2-year anniversary, and we wanted to do something other than sit at home. And so we kind of figured out, well, what kind of vacation can we take that's still safe and responsible? And we ended up getting an Airbnb on Whidbey Island, if anyone's familiar with the Puget Sound, Pacific Northwest. And we pretty much just sat on a deck outside and watched the tide go in and out
That sounds
for five
wonderful.
days. And we did drink some wine as well. Uh, and as far as 2020 goes, not a bad vacation.
Hmm. That's excellent. And it's such a beautiful part of the country. It's good that you were able to get out there. So
Yeah.
yeah, and happy anniversary to
Thank
you and your
you.
wife.
Thank you.
So, yeah, we are, as always, interested in your questions as well. So, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And at the end of the presentation, I will go over all of those. David will help us facilitate that. And just as a reminder, we launched last or 2 weeks ago on CX Day, which is the first Tuesday of October every year. Uh, we launched the Year of CX. And so if you go to yearofcx.com, you can sign up for every other week receiving a tool, a piece of information, a piece of communication that will help you develop your customer experience program. So these are real deliverables that we use with clients. We're going to let you in on that for an entire year. Every other week, we will be delivering something of value to you. So I really hope that you sign up for that. It's totally free. And it's really just to, again, provide that way to create fewer ruined days for customers in as many ways as we can. And so next week we'll be launching another one. So if you sign up, you'll get not only what we've already released, but everything that we release for the future as well. So how about we jump in and get started?
Let's do it.
All
I'm going
right.
to disappear.
So the question that I'm asking today is your organization's customer experience proactive or reactive? And what I mean by that is customer experience is about design. It's about really understanding what do our customers need and how can we deliver it for them, and then designing the experience about that. However, a lot of times what's happening is customer experience is kind of slipping into this reactive mode because when we think of customer experience, sometimes we relegate it to just customer service, thinking that it's about fixing problems, it's about solving things for customers. And yes, that is an aspect of it. But in order to do this really well and design the best experiences for our customers, we have to continue to be really focused on how can we be as proactive as possible? And so when I bring this up, a lot of times leaders will look at me and say, yes, yes, that's very important. That's very important. But then they actually only reward the reactive duties of their CX leaders. So things like tracking metrics and reacting to those customer problems. So it takes a little bit of focus. It takes kind of working a muscle sometimes that we're not asked to really focus on. So I encourage you to really think about this in your own organization and understand how can you be more proactive because it will serve your customers better. So here are some examples of reactive customer experience that I see over and over. And of course, this list could have been a lot longer, but I wanted to highlight a few of the most common things that I see, but I would encourage you to tell us what you're seeing in your organizations as well. So first of all, metrics are measured for measurement's sake. We see this over and over and over. As we developed more key skills around how to measure customer experience, we got a little obsessed with those metrics. Journey maps live on the wall for months or years, and they are just artwork in some cases. Treating customer service as separate from customer experience. This is one that I'm seeing more and more. And I'm curious what you guys are seeing in your organizations and the companies that you work with, because I think that this is something that is because as the role of CX expands and the role of customer service and support expands, sometimes they get housed in two different areas and they don't really work together, which is intriguing to me. So let's talk about how to be proactive instead. Metrics should be treated as a lead, the first lead in a larger investigation. Journey maps should live, work, and grow with you. They should be a tool, not an artifact. And then we need to weave customer service into customer experience in a more cohesive and collaborative way. So let's dive into each of these ideas. The first one, metrics are measured for measurement's sake. I'm sure some of you are nodding along and seeing this in your organization as well, because watching these numbers, it can be a little addictive. I know that when I send out surveys or when I'm tracking feedback, it can be really tempting to just kind of watch and every day check in and think, did it go up? Did it go down? What can I say? How can I report this back? What are the communication points that we need to make about these numbers? And in a way, we're doing that to serve our leaders, to serve our brand on the inside. And it doesn't really become about serving the customers, because the power of these metrics is not really the numbers themselves, it's the insights that they provide. And so if we're not taking the time to look at those as, okay, what can I ask more about? What does this tell me or not tell me? We need to treat this as the first step in an investigation. And you guys know I love the word investigation for customer experience because, we are the experience investigators after all. But I really believe that a lot of the work that we do has to be about kind of poking through some of these numbers and saying, what is this really telling us? Where do we need to ask more questions? So when we look at the report and we see these numbers and their behavior going up or down or anything else, then we need to start identifying what is or isn't happening here. And that means questions. So, what does it mean when your NPS drops a little during a 6-month period? Is that something to be worried about? Was there a reason that that happened within that particular 6 months that you can identify? And if not, how can you go about identifying the root cause of that? Why is our churn rate going up after, just a little each month? Sometimes we look at these numbers and we kind of tell ourselves stories. We say, well, it's just a little. It's less than, we're still ahead of our competition. So we shouldn't worry about if our churn rate goes up just a little. But if that happens month after month, that is telling you a story. That is telling you that something isn't quite right. And it could be something that is going to blow up later. So watching those little tiny tweaks in the numbers can help you really stay ahead of those challenges that you might have later if you just kind of let the data happen. And then what is causing this dip in our CSAT after product delivery? Like we can identify the exact place where our CSAT is going down. So, what does that tell us? Well, that tells us that we need to look into that. What's happening during product delivery and how can we actually increase that CSAT, that customer satisfaction rate, instead of actually just kind of shrugging and saying, huh, that's interesting, and putting it on our report. So we really need to work on encouraging our teams, encouraging our leadership throughout the organization to look at these numbers a little differently. And we need to encourage people to question them. And that can be a hard thing, but I encourage you to have the courage to do that, because if you can say to all your leadership who receives these numbers, who looks at these dashboards, say, tell me what you think. Tell me what questions you have, and then really facilitate that discussion. They will have a different lens than you, and that's okay. So your sales team might have insights into what's happening when prospects don't buy. They might be bringing up some challenges that customers have shared with them that aren't yet really showing up in your data, but might help you connect the dots here about what the metrics are actually telling you. So metrics are a big part of what we do, but we need to understand why they're there and be proactive about acknowledging the insights around them. Another reactive thing we see over and over and over, journey maps. You guys have heard me say this, they are tools, and yet too often we treat them as artifacts. We treat them as something that is done, that is framed, that, okay, now it's time to move on. And we don't really acknowledge that even if our business isn't changing very much, the world around us is. The marketplace is changing. Your customer expectations are changing. And I mean, if there was ever a poster child of a year for change, it's 2020, right? We have seen so much change in the world that many people, I mean, I don't know one person who could have anticipated all the change we saw. And so if we're not acknowledging that change in the journeys, in and using the maps to actually facilitate better journeys for our customers, then it's really an artifact. It's something that, we did, it provided us insight in the moment, and it's something static. I encourage you to really look at this as something that will live and grow with you, something that you can add to, something that you can pull out certain sections and say, how can we do this better? There are so many ways to use journey maps. And I think that if we are talking about them as just the deliverable, we're missing the magic of them. I wrote in the blog this week how my son's preschool teachers used to say, it's process over product, meaning that, you know what, if your kid is the type of kid who finger paints for half a second and then gets distracted and has to do something else, so you don't get that final painting, that's okay. It's not about the painting, it's about the process. Kids learn through play, kids learn through all these different activities. That's what we're focused on here. And I always remembered that phrase, process over product, because I've witnessed this in journey mapping. The process of journey mapping is where we get those insights, is where we start connecting those dots, is where we start sharing empathy with the customer, all those wonderful outcomes that we can get with journey maps. But if we only focus on the deliverable, then it becomes this artifact, this thing that we hang on the wall, this thing that we pass around, and we don't continue to use it as the amazing tool it can be. So be more proactive with those journey maps any way you can, because it will serve you and it will serve your customers in the long run. Another way that CX can be a little reactive is when we're treating customer service as a separate organization from customer experience. And we are sometimes even housing them in totally different places. We are not communicating with one another. I've seen CX teams who literally say, well, customer service is not part of CX. And I say that's bonkers because of course it is. Customer experience is the end-to-end journey. It's all about all those interactions that your customers have with your brand and how they interact with your brand. And if they have an issue and they call customer service, or they reach out to chat, or they rely on customer support to help them actually get their product working or on board with your service, then that is absolutely part of customer experience. And furthermore, those people on the front lines talking, interacting with customers every single day, they have a ton of valuable information for you. They have a ton of valuable insights for you. And so, if we are not communicating and weaving those two things in and creating that cycle of communication, then we're missing a huge opportunity to serve our customers in a more proactive way because they will see things before it becomes data. So, those agents out there who are interacting with customers, if you're not really connected to them, if you're not connected to the customer support leadership, then you're missing an opportunity to be more proactive instead of just waiting for those issues that customer service and support are seeing to become bigger issues for you and for your brand. So, this is an area that I think is growing in the way of a challenge because customer support teams are expanding, especially this year. Most of us are remote. Many of the customer service teams suddenly are distributed workforce and they're all over. So we really need to think through how can we create more communication channels, more regular, proactive ways to reach out to our customer service and support leader partners and invite them into this conversation to be more proactive. It's a great opportunity to build consensus, to really collaborate on behalf of the customer and make real change instead of just kind of waiting for that change to happen. So I encourage you all to think about that. And that's what I just said. There must be a cycle of communication, and we have to really collaborate on behalf of the customer because at the end of the day, the reason I wanted to talk about this is because it's really easy to slip into this mode where we think we're doing everything, we're checking everything off. We still might not even have enough hours in the day to check everything off of our list. And so we feel like we're doing a lot for the customer, but we might not be acting on their behalf. We might not be really acting in the way that we want to serve them and we want to do this proactively. So really when you have a plan for this, when you are checking off your list every week, just reflect a little bit on how much does this serve the customer? How much can we do to turn these things that we're doing, which are all important, which is, tracking the metrics and using the journey map and reaching out to customer service. How can we use these things to be more proactive, to understand our customers better, and to predict what they need next? Because so many customers have told us all over the world now, there's so much data on this that they want to be seen, they want to be recognized, they want their experience to be personalized, and they want you to know their needs before they tell you. And so, what better way to do that than to leverage what we already have in front of us and turn that into more proactive behavior on behalf of our customers? So I'm curious about you guys. What are you seeing in your situations, in your organizations? How are you really interacting with your customer service team? I would love to know that. I would also love to hear how you're using journey maps, or what are some of the other challenges you see where you say, here's a way that we could be more proactive. I'd love to hear that from you as well. So at this point, I think we're ready to open it up to questions and see what you guys have to say.
Yeah, let's do it. So while everybody types in your questions, we'll give you a second and we'll start off with a question that came in from email. Of course, if you have questions over the course of the week before these webinars even start, you can send in your question to jeannie@experienceinvestigators.com and we'll queue those up for these meetings. So one person asked, so I appreciate that we need to report more than numbers, but what are some ways to identify why we're getting the numbers we are? In the
Mhm.
blog, you said we need to be detectives. And today you said investigators. I like that word better. But how can we do that? And I know, Jeannie, earlier today, just now, you mentioned asking leaders in other departments, kind of
Mhm.
who might be more familiar with what's going on right in front of them. But are there other ways, or can you speak more about how to connect the dots between the numbers and why those numbers are happening?
Sure. Yeah, I think it depends a lot on how you're collecting those numbers. So, as an example, I was working with a B2B firm and they were only collecting Net Promoter Score, NPS, once a year. and they had the same person, instead of sending it out, they had the same guy picking up the phone, calling every client and saying, "Would you recommend us, yes or no?" And they they were getting very stagnant results, and yet that was not really matching up with their business outcomes. They were losing clients, their churn rate was going up, all of these things were happening, but they kept kind of patting themselves on the back about the NPS. They were like, "Well, it hasn't changed in 3 years. We're doing pretty well." And what that came down to was exploring, okay, we need to get more feedback. We need to figure this out. What's going wrong? So we started actually kind of a rolling feedback system where we would call clients at key points in their journey. So instead of just saying every December you get a survey, we actually started looking at, okay, what happens 3 months in? What happens 6 months in? How can we do this in a way that they feel okay telling us their criticisms? Because if we call somebody and ask that question and we already have a relationship with them, they're much less likely to say, "You know what? I really hate how you force me into your billing system, and it's painful and it's enough to make me think about switching," which we heard during some of those surveys that we sent out. So, I think one is exploring, are you asking the right feedback in the right moment in the right way? That's one of the questions that can come up from this. The other thing to explore are those root causes, figure out, if we know that after product delivery, CSAT goes down, what does that tell us? Well, that tells us something's wrong with product delivery. And if we don't know what that is, we need to find out. And you can do that through a variety of ways. I mean, journey mapping, getting into that, what I like to call the micro mapping, where you're really focused on one part of the journey. Customer advisory groups, user forums, looking at reviews, looking at where customers are talking where they don't think you're listening, like if there are different user forums outside of your own site, things like that, as well as just inviting customers to tell you. If you see somebody who's giving you feedback and they give you that permission, they say, "Here's my email, follow up with me," follow up with them and find out what's going on here. What are we doing wrong? And, something else I mentioned in the blog is that it's really important when we go into those conversations to not have an agenda. We need to be really open minded and just listen. Because if we are going in thinking, what I think it is? I think it's that those product guys, they added that button on the mobile app and everybody hates it. And I told them and blah, blah, blah. If we go in with that sort of agenda, we won't really hear what the customer is saying. So make sure that if you are following up with individual customers, that you are taking that deep breath, getting very zen about it and saying feedback is a gift. Whatever they tell me is a gift. And once you can start identifying those things, then you can start addressing them proactively. And then even better, you can circle back with those customers and say, "Hey, thank you so much for your feedback. Here's what we did about it. And here's how we resolved it. And that was all thanks to you." So, there's so much opportunity for engagement when we actually treat these metrics as the lead in that investigation.
That's great. Thank you. So let's jump to a question about journey mapping. You talk about the delicate balance of creating journey maps that are simple enough to use, but detailed enough to actually provide
Mhm.
insights. How do we know if we're doing that right?
Oh, this is like the $1,000,000 question. And it's so funny. I was on a roundtable 2 weeks ago with a bunch of CX leaders, and this was the biggest struggle. And then this morning, I was on a roundtable with CX leaders, and this came up again. So I think this is a true challenge that we're having. So here's how I think of it. When you are approaching journey mapping, you have to think about what your goal is and what story is it absolutely necessary that you understand from the customers. So if your goal is to resolve, let's say, going back to that product delivery example, if your goal in journey mapping is to understand what is the current state of product delivery and how can we improve that, then you want to focus on that story and focus on, this is what's happening to the customer. Now, I have found, and I have been guilty of this, when I approach journey mapping, sometimes I get way too detailed because I think everything's important because I'm like, well, this is still happening to the customer, so we better record it. And what I have done with some clients is we decide from the outset, okay, we're going to keep this like laundry list of all the stuff we find that doesn't fit, and we'll figure that out later. Or I've even done things where I have kind of the high level journey map that people see that the client uses, but then the CX team and I, sometimes I use a spreadsheet. I call it touch point inventory. It's red, yellow, green. So it's very much like this is a problem. Let's figure this out later. But it goes into that level of detail and minutia that if you put on the journey map, it would just be confusing and people wouldn't know how to update it and all those things. So you have to make these strategic decisions as you go, but you have to kind of know why you're doing it in the beginning. And that's the key part. So there's no perfect way to do a journey map. Some people in the industry will tell you that that's blasphemy, but I really believe that every journey is different and unique, and every goal of a journey map is different and unique. And so you need to figure out what's the purpose. And then as you discover those things that might just like muddy up the map, still place them somewhere. And it doesn't have to be pretty. It doesn't even have to be a perfect map, all the way through. You have this beautiful map that's high level, that's easy to update, that drives action in your organization. And then you have this layer underneath where maybe it's just, these are all the things that we discovered, and then you prioritize those as you get them. So there are so many ways to do this, but I would say just don't get too hung up on either one. So if you are doing a simplified version for your organization and you find something that you think, oh, this is terrible for the customers, but it doesn't quite fit into this story, don't just ignore that. Don't just push that aside because that's still important, but it doesn't necessarily have to be in the map. And then the flip side is if you get too complex and complicated, it's really hard to update, it's really hard to use, it's really hard to leverage. So you have to walk that line to figure this out. And I wish there was like a here's how you do it, 1, 2, 3, but it really does depend on your situation, your leadership, and your goals.
Touchpoint inventory sounds interesting. Sounds like maybe something we should incorporate into our year of CX
There
resources.
you go. Everything I say now, you're going to say, let's put it in your CX.
Yeah, let's build something. Cool. Well, no questions from the audience quite yet. So if you are, if you are working on a question or thinking of a question, go ahead and get that in. I'm going to ask a question from me.
Sure.
So you talk about how customer service and customer experience are not separate. You used the word bonkers, which I appreciate. So if we're in an organization where the culture believes that those are separate and there's not communication across teams, how can you work towards creating better communication and better collaboration?
Oh, that's a good question. I think
I put you on the spot.
I know, but I think part of this is here I'm going to be very honest about what I hear from people. And one of the things that I hear is that sometimes CX teams and CX leaders are seen as like they treat themselves like they're more elite than customer service and support teams and leaders, and that creates friction that is just unnecessary. And so I think we need to understand what the perception sometimes is in our own organizations, and if we are not, as the CX leaders, inviting our partners in customer service and support into those conversations and into collaborating with us, then it's easy to see that rift really grow. And on the flip side of that, sometimes there are customer support leaders and teams who really see their role as completely boxed in and they don't really want to know the rest of the journey. They really focus so much on, these are the issues that we address with our customers, and that's about it. So we need some more open-mindedness on that side too. So we need to figure out how can we collaborate on behalf of the customer. And sometimes that's just about being invited into the conversation. I think that can go a long way. Call your support leaders, once every other week or something, and just say, hey, I'm just curious, what are you hearing? How can we work together on this? Here's what we're planning. What do you think of that? And invite them into those discussions so you can figure out ways to formalize that collaboration more moving forward. But I think right now there's just all this weird disconnection between those two groups sometimes. And sometimes they report to totally different parts of the organization. Sometimes their leadership uh, doesn't really, they don't see the role of the other side as important to their accountabilities and responsibilities. So we need to, it's a cultural thing, I think, but it's also just about, are you being proactive enough about inviting your partners into that conversation? That can go a long, long way.
Wonderful. So we do have one more request from the audience, or for the audience, I should say, to let us know how this went. You can go to bit.ly/let Jeannie know and let us know how this webinar was for you, if it was helpful, what you liked the best, what you'd love to see in the future. We base a lot of these topics around requests that come in from you. So by all means, let us know at this URL. Otherwise, Jeannie, where can folks find you?
Well, first of all, before I get to that, I just want to
Okay.
say it's always fun to see where everybody's from. And
Yeah.
I'm scanning right now, and we have Cape Town and what else? Kenya. We have Sudan and Norway. I mean, it's so cool, you guys. So thank you so much for always coming to these and giving us your insights and your questions. It just means a lot to us because it helps us live our mission of creating fewer ruined days for customers. So, we love hearing from you, as David said. Whoops, I just messed up. uh, no, there we are. Okay.
Good.
Wow, this hasn't happened in a while. I'm rusty from
Yeah,
1 week off.
we took last week off, and now
I know. Look at
we're
this.
rookies
That's
again.
all right. Here we go. Ready? We're going to go speed round. Actually, I'm just going to keep this one up.
That's perfect. Yeah.
Okay, so you can find me all these different places. You can reach out to me on email, jeannie@experienceinvestigators.com. You can also find tons of resources on our site, experienceinvestigators.com/resources. We have blogs, we have downloadables, we have videos, we have all sorts of things for you guys. So feel free to take advantage of that. And then, of course, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, we're on all these different places. And as a reminder, we've got yearofcx.com that has a place for you to sign up to get all those downloadables, everything else. And next week, we will be releasing another one about storyboarding. So that should be really great. And we will have the webinar will be focused on how to use that tool. So we encourage you to sign up there, get that tool, and then also join us next Friday and most Fridays here for our Ask Me Anything webinar. So thank you guys so much for being here as always, and go have a great weekend and do what you can to get away. Whatever that looks like for you, do what you can to do that this weekend. So thanks everybody, and we will see you next week.